What's good, y'all? What's good? What's good? What's good? Hope you guys are ready for tonight. You asked for it. We brought it to you. After we did that short from Arlington with our guest tonight, a bunch of you hit me up like, hey, we need a full-length video. Dave himself was like, I would like to sit down for a longer video because there's so much we could talk about that just you can't cover in 15 minutes. You just can't do it. So tonight we're bringing that to you. I'm really excited about it. We are diving into more than just ball pythons. And while most of you absolutely love ball pythons, I do myself. Dave does as well. There's so much more. Hence the title. Why you're breeding the wrong species. I'm not saying that ball pythons aren't for you or aren't for everyone. I'm just trying to shed some light that there's a lot more than just ball pythons, and we should check those out. Let's give some love to the people showing up, hanging out. Bree, what's up? Smoky Mountain Balls, Kaiju, what's going on? What's going on? Thanks for stopping in tonight. Strictly Strange Snakes, interesting title. I don't think I am, but I'm ready. Yeah, I'm gonna assume this is Jamie. That's Bam. What's going on, Will? Ready for the show? Let's see. Christian, Texas Kid, Reptiles, local El Pasoan. Ooh, jumping all over. Area 51 Morphs. What's up, Matt? Green Line Morphs. Jay, what's going on? What's going on? Mindy Fam Bam. What's going on? How you doing? Let's see. Jay Quintana. What's going on, brother? How you doing? Ray, thanks for stopping in tonight. Dragon 1982. Slinging them rats. Here we go. Tammy, hey, thanks for showing up again. Appreciate you. And Tom, as other people roll in, we'll give some love to them. Everything will be popped up on the screen. So let's get to it. We're going to run through our sponsors real quick, give them the love, and then we're going to get to this because we got a man with a lot to talk about and a couple of different things he needs to do tonight. So we're going to get on to it. So husbandry's super important. It's one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, and one of the thoughts that we have. I think it's very important. You can't keep the right husbandry without the right equipment. I like to go one place for my equipment. Here at Outside the Clutch, we're honored to be sponsored by VivTech. Are you ready for innovation? Tired of the same boring product that's been used for 30 years? Ready to give your reptiles and amphibians the UV they really deserve? Then look no farther than VivTech. Their 3-watt LED bulbs provide the UV rays your animals have been missing. With 3 bulbs to fit your pet's climate needs, plus a dimmable feature, it's the only bulbs we use for UV. And it's the only bulb with a 2-year warranty in the industry. Plus now you can monitor all your pet's husbandry from your phone 24/7 with their sensors, and even ship your customers' animals in their custom bags. So what are you waiting for? Go to VivTechProducts.com today, use code FCLUTCH0322 for 15% off, and provide your animals the best care they've ever had. And you got all kinds of choices when it comes to substrate, but there's only one substrate I like to use here. I think you should try it out too. Are you ready for the best coconut substrate in the game? Then you gotta get ReptiChip. First off, it's America's chip because it's veteran owned. Secondly, why wouldn't you want the best cocoa chip for your animals? Go to ReptiChip.com, use code FeelyChippin for 10% off up to 3 breeder blocks, or your entire order of Easy Hatch trays or any Redline Science equipment on the site. Limit 1 coupon per customer. Or reach out to me as a representative in the El Paso area, and don't forget to join the Reptilution, where all profits go to helping those in need within the reptile community. Finally, y'all know it. I love this show. This show's doing amazing. Show Me Snakes. I love what Mickey does. Love the family atmosphere that he has. The love for all species, hot and not. He's got a lot of shows going on this weekend. He's got a lot of shows going on next weekend. So if there's some places you want to see, this weekend they're in Janesville, Wisconsin, and St. Louis, Missouri. Next weekend you can catch them at Tampa, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, and Shelbyville, Kentucky. And the following weekend, I can tell you this, they will be in Odessa, Texas, good old West Texas. We will be there. We will be vending. If you want to check us out, come check us out. Come say hi. Let us know you watch the show. So let's get to this. Let's have some fun. Give some love. All right, y'all. Mr. Dave Levinson, Custom Scales.
How's it going, bud?
How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm feeling good. Long day at work. I got my beer. I don't drink that much, but I'm going to drink this today for you.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And then this other one I got on the floor over here, too. Yeah, man. So lead the way. Jump in. Let's do this.
Yeah. So I spoke about husbandry when we were talking about ReptiChip, obviously the sponsor. We love them. Love what they do. I love their product. I use it because I mainly breed ball pythons, and it just works really well for ball pythons, right? But I want to bring up a clip that you shared today and kind of talk about that and talk about the biosecurity and how we might not be keeping these animals to a standard like we all think we are. So I would like to, let's see, bring that up, and hopefully you can hear it. Don't know if you're going to be able
I don't know where the longevity goes in that. I'm very curious to see. To my knowledge, the oldest living snake on record is a ball python that lived for 47 and a half years at the Philadelphia Zoo. Now, that animal was a subadult when they got it, and they're only counting the time of its lifespan from the time it was at the zoo, which was 47 and a half years. So you're probably talking about close to a 50-year lifespan on one of these animals. And I'm really curious to see what, I mean, if that's what we're looking at, this female's only halfway there, to see what happens with that. But I think that's something that I've tried to get as close to nature with my animals and away from that laboratory mentality over the years. And it's the total opposite from what I was when I was younger. The idea that we have these extremely clean or sterile areas that are perfectly ventilated and the perfect temperatures for these animals is really arrogant and ridiculous once you sit down and think about it. And I learned this in the beginning of the Burmese python problem in the Everglades back in 2008, 2009. I was really combating the argument of the explosion of these animals in the wild, that they could just multiply exponentially. And, my argument was, at the time, I think the largest clutch of Burmese python eggs at that time was like 109 from one female. And it was in captivity. It was a captive breeding of a very large snake. And my argument was, under optimal conditions, is the most food, the lighting, the temperature, everything, this snake produced 109 eggs.
So before we finish this video, I like I was saying, I want to talk about that. So Graziani's talking about lab conditions, essentially, or like what we like to say is the industry standard, right? Let's keep them perfectly clean. Don't let them have any bacteria. Don't let them have anything. We essentially keep them in a small container compared to their body so that we can control full climate. What are your thoughts on our standards right now? And are we being a little too lab-like versus letting a bacteria kind of build up, or giving them free range because it's a living animal and they don't necessarily need that lab sterility?
So actually two parts to that, because that interview was a few years ago, and why I posted it, because that one huge clutch of 111 eggs the other day in the Everglades they reported. But there's another part, going back to what you said about bacteria. Graziani, it was either before or after that, we were talking about his husbandry and everything else. He doesn't use cleaner, he uses water. Animals use the bathroom. He takes water, sprays down the area, wipes off everything he sees, puts new bedding in, moves on. He believes that a little bit of bacteria is not a bad thing. I think anything kept too sterile when exposed to something might have more drastic effects on the animal. Could actually see forms of an RI, which I always say RI is a tough one in this industry. It's such a generally used term for like 30 or 40 different bacterias and 30 or 40 different diseases. But I think at the industry, and I don't know if this is a weird way of saying it, but I think everybody finds what works for their collection, and what works for them and keeps everything going is the way they're going to do things. Some people might think that Graziani's crazy for only using water and not some kind of disinfectant. But one of the conversations too we had, and again, this was like 3 years ago, is he has a ball python, and I believe it was named Togo or Tobo or something like that. It's a female. The significance of that female was, I think it was 27 years old at least when we had that interview. It was her birthday, ironically, when we were talking about it. And it's the original female that he used to breed to the original pastel he ever brought in the country, the original Graziani pastel. And one neat thing that he was doing 3 years ago, which I thought just had some nostalgia to it, is he was breeding that original pastel back to the exact same mother that he had the very first clutch from. I thought that was fucking awesome. I don't know why, because everything started from that one clutch for the Graziani line and went from there. So the fact that he could still replicate that 20 years later, after the mutation had already been established in the industry, and he still had the founding male and the founding female, he's clearly doing something right over there. So, when it comes to your practices, the bedding you use, the cleaners, whatever else, if it's working for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, move on to something different.
Oh, absolutely. So I know from my personal experience, and I'll say it flat out, I support what he says in that and kind of his persona on that. So I used to use a lot of F10. I'm not knocking F10. I think it's a great product. Used to use it like religiously, won't touch anything else, right? For a while I was so OCD about it and like overly sterilizing stuff that I did see, okay, they're a little bit more susceptible to any change, right? Whether it's a food source, like stress alone, they build bacteria in their stomach, their pH gets thrown off because of stress. Now, granted, most of the time that won't show like a physical RI or anything like that, but the smallest things seem to have a bigger toll when I was only using F10.
Yeah.
I switched to Dawn dish soap because of my mentor, and I haven't had the issues, but I still am fairly OCD about it. I'm not going to lie. I know the people that try to do like bioactive and all that, which I think is a beautiful thing. It scares the bejesus out of me, to be honest, because I feel like I don't have any control. But and I think that's one of the things the industry needs to look at too is since they're animals, we need, and let's face it, like maybe the pet keepers or like your average small keeper, like 15, 20 animal collection, they're probably going to the vet for anything that happens, right? But your larger scale breeder, I don't see them doing that with every animal, especially if something spreads. Like I know a lot of people that have the old mentality of if it sneezes, it freezes.
That's what Ben always said back in the day when he was alive, and sneezes and freezes. As sad as it is, for the good of the rest of them.
Exactly. And it's hard, man. Like it's hard to make that decision because you don't look at them as just a commodity or like a crop, or you could tell I've been reading a lot of Morph Market stuff lately.
Yeah.
But,
I think I saw a post a few hours ago where somebody referred to an animal as a product. And I think that turned into a thread or whatever we call them on there. But yeah, man, I think, you know what I always say about this kind of stuff? At the end of the day, you got to look at yourself in the mirror. You look at yourself in the mirror and you're happy. What more is there? And some people will be satisfied with whatever they're satisfied with. But
Absolutely.
I like my own little bubble now, buddy. You don't see me get involved in too many of the weird conversations. Behind the scenes, of course, I'll talk to my core group about certain things, but like, I keep on telling people, I think the most tragic thing about the industry right now is it seems to be less about the animals and more about the people. And that's weird to me. The animals brought us all together. A lot of us, I always say, different backgrounds, but the animals are a common thing for us. It doesn't matter what you are, where you're from. If you like boa constrictors, you can sit down and talk boa constrictors for hours. I
Absolutely.
hope people will get back to it. I'm not really opposed to what's happening. Also, I think it's just all happening so abruptly. I think it's a shock for a lot of people. But I don't think it's as bad as people think. I think it's kind of like when you pay attention to 1% that's the loudest on any side of a conversation. It seems crazy, but I think it's less than 1% that are going to be affected by what changes are being made right now.
No, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people that have, I'm not going to say stardom, or like the people that have gotten extremely lucky in the last year or two, right? While the industry has blown up, they, some of them have kept their cool. They still act the same way. Some of them don't, unfortunately, and they're going to get bit in the butt because of that. But I very much, like you, try not to get into all the drama. I'm here for the animals. I'm here for the love of it. It's something that it's been in both of our lives for the majority of our lives. So obviously we're here for the long haul, especially with what you do and your breeding operation. Let's kind of talk about that for a little bit. I do want to get back to that Graziani clip here in a second, just to talk about that record breaking as we get into berms and things like that.
No, of course.
But let's talk about some of the multitude of species that you currently are working.
So it's really a diverse collection. So of course I have my collection that I've always had, that I've been working with for almost 20 years now, and it's changed a little bit, but that has always consisted of boa constrictors, blue tongue skinks for the last like 12-ish years, maybe 13 this fall. I work with corn snakes, like a lot of old other people did. JMG Reptiles had this beautiful collection. I used to go look at it all the time. I always told Jeff Sr., if he ever retired, I'd be very interested, because he put so much work into it. When he retired, I ended up getting all his animals. Now, where I could be hammering out crazy numbers, I find that a lot of times I'm more maintaining the collection, especially with what I do. I'm so now involved in the other side of the collection, that is Woma pythons, blood pythons, ball pythons, a lot of boa constrictors. Man, there's a couple odd and end species out there too. We got a rhino iguana on the property that's just kind of here because we like them. And I could probably look around and find a bunch of other things. There's womas hatching in the incubator right now, thank God. I tried something a little differently with the eggs this year, and I failed. There's so many different ways to do Woma pythons, and I kind of had this like idea, and I didn't go with this idea, and I'm sad I didn't even try it once, but have you ever seen the way that they do like chameleon eggs, or panther chameleon eggs, where they'll take like a small deli cup, put all the eggs in there in a dry substrate, take a bigger deli cup with water, put it in there, and let it just float around? I thought maybe with the Woma eggs that'd be good. Compared to just having the rack where maybe some of the water could wick up or it could drip from the top. I thought maybe that'd be awesome. But I went a different route, a more recommended route, like a 3-layer system between a dry layer, a wet layer, and a dry layer, and then the eggs on top. I didn't make the wet layer wet enough. The dry pulled a lot of the moisture out of the middle, and I did start getting eggs that started dimpling on me early, and then getting smaller and smaller to the point where I did lose some babies. My fault. My last couple bins I set up look significantly better, but I don't know if you know about Woma eggs. You almost have to check them all the time, and then you got to be careful, because one droplet of water, a lot of times they can go bad. I've tried it in the past where I've had them suspended over water. I've had them at a crazy angle, so the water kind of just does one of these the whole time. It doesn't drip down. It kind of runs down the side. I wish I would have done them 4 different ways this year, or at least set them up properly the first time. The recommendation given to me was a very good recommendation. The guy does 100% every year on it.
Wow.
My mixture was just not there like it should have been. That's going off for another tangent. I was looking at the woman's in the incubator a couple minutes ago, so you got me thinking about it. But yeah, like I said, it's not a crazy amount of different species. We probably have about 10 on the property that we work with. Some seasons we don't even breed certain species. I've got some species I've just been slow raising up for like 3 or 4 years. I think my biggest problem with the hobby for me over the years has been is it's also addicting. And every day I can find something else I really want. And the idea of having 1 or 2 doesn't do it for me. I want 5 or 6 or 7. So like larger colubrids, man, king rats. And I'm in all these king rat groups right now, and I'm seeing all these different color variations and these big, beautiful natural variations. I wouldn't mind going on and buying 20 of those tomorrow if I could. But then, I got things like blue tongue skinks I've been working on for like 12 years. I had some years where I didn't do as much as I had in the past. There was multiple years when me and Cheryl were together where she did all the breeding for us. And, I was very hands off, unfortunately, because I just got so consumed with the other side of the company. So really, my biggest problem I think I've had, especially in the expansion, is staying on track to be good at everything. And I find that challenging. And a lot of times that's because, I'm still doing the day-to-day work. I'm still scrubbing tubs. I'm doing whatever else. I'm going to do whatever I ask anybody else to do. But it's really tough to keep up sometimes. Like I said, when I'm cleaning a tub, that means I'm not ultrasounding. When I'm doing this, I'm not rotating. Like I'm my own worst enemy out there most times.
Right. No, I completely get that. What's one of the things that you've learned kind of from going from just that hobbyist level to a business level with the takeover of the different collections that you've had over the years?
Well, the coming out and helping with Ben stuff was learn everything, even if you don't know it. Me always being a small keeper, I had like 27 blue tongue skinks, 20 boas, maybe 20 to 40 ball pythons at the most, and then other species that I was working with off and on. It was easy. And then coming into something, especially coming into a blind, just having to come in and figure out my own way of doing things like overnight. I learned how to do it the hard way every day. Like every day was something new you had to pay attention to, something that you might have overlooked the day beforehand. Even still today, like, as active as I am and working, there's still days where I could be better and do more. This really is a 7-day schedule when you work with animals. And, when I do take days off, I feel guilty. Like I think of what's not being done. But, I think, the difference between like me just having my own thing and then being part of this larger company was, with Ben, he grew into it, like I say, organically. It started with 90 foundation females. He went out and got mutations he liked. He started holding back all his own animals for a few years. It got there gradually. Going from me working in my home with a couple rooms full of animals to, I think it was like 25 or 2,700 square foot to the brim. Shock and awe, buddy. And nothing was ever perfect. Nothing can ever be perfect. Try to do the best you can, but it's everyone in the industry is going to have problems. Everyone's going to have a mite one day. Don't pretend like you don't. It's not about the problems you're having. It's about what you do when you find the problem. And again, like I said, sometimes you're going to learn the hard way. When it comes to veterinary care, man, you're lucky to find a vet that knows what the fuck they're talking about exotic pets a lot of times.
Find a vet that'll even put their hands on one, even when they say they're an exotic vet.
Yes. So that's always been an issue. And when I lived in North Carolina, I had a snow boa. I raised it from a baby. She got 5 years old and she died. No reason, nothing odd, just cleaned her the day beforehand. So I panicked. Took her in for a necropsy, and she had on her kidneys tumors, and the tumors killed her. So like as much as you think you know why things could happen, there's a lot of things that are happening that you wouldn't know unless you actually open up an animal.
Right. No, 100% agree. So you went into it, your focus, and we've kind of talked about this in previous episodes a little bit. Your focus and like your vision has always been a little bit clearer with the BOAs. What would you say kind of drives you in the BOA side of things versus the Python side?
Well, I bought my first boa when I was 8 years old. Had it till I was 12. When I was 12, it was too big. When I turned 17, I bought another boa. And when I turned 18, I found out about the hobby as a whole. Boas, I don't know what it is. I just always collected boa books growing up. I was always very fascinated with them. There's something about them that, I talk to people about different species they work with. And, if you're not like all mentally in with certain species, it's really hard to do things. Try to say how to put this. How about this? When everything's said and done, you might be remembered for a pastel line you name after yourself, or maybe now interviews that we do that maybe somebody's going to watch someday. If you're lucky enough to put your name on something that can maybe live forever in the hobby, I find that to be very gratifying. I was an art major in high school. I always, I didn't know a lot about genetics, but like, moving into reptiles was my new color palette. And when I look at boas, I see things differently than when I look at a ball python. I've made mistakes in ball pythons where I've done pairings and made some of the nicest shit I've ever made. And with boas, I've found that you could put two of the nicest pastel lines together that are unrelated and make a normal boa. So I do find that boas can be a little more challenging, more line breeding involved. And the fact that it's not instant gratification and you got to put the time in, I find that to be a little more fulfilling. But with ball pythons, though, I always say, like, we'll never have such a diverse color palette. What we're working with in that snake is unlike anything else we've ever had in this hobby and unlike anything I ever think we will. And, I always find it funny for like the last 15 years in the hobby, how everyone says it's over for ball pythons, they've peaked. The reality is, I don't think that day is ever going to truly come. I think that we'll always find new directions and new ways of reinventing previous genes we didn't work with. Certain people, the blue tongue skink community is a good example. Like if they expanded like crazy about 6 or 7 years ago when Brian Barczyk started talking about it on snake bites. Now, here's the wonderful thing about that. It brought in 10, 20, 30, 40 brand new breeders that did pairings that no one else would have thought about doing and made animals we never would have saw without them. And that's the cool thing about ball pythons is there's so many people working with them. They can all go their own direction and create something completely out of the ordinary that may give somebody else a good idea. When I was at Justin's house with Chad, I made a comment to him like, how great is it that you've planted this clown seed in everyone's head? Because now you can sit back and watch every single gene ever made in ball pythons put into a clown without you having to do it. And then you can cherry pick what you think will make your collection better moving forward. So any community, when they expand, is always a good thing for the community because, again, more eyes on projects, more directions that the guys that have been doing it for a long time might not think about doing. But again, boas, I just look at boas and I see something differently. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what my foundation animal or what my big thing is going to be in the hobby when everything's said and done. I do have a new mutation here that I'm working with. We'll see where that goes. I'm still panicking. I got one litter of babies on the ground. I had a slug out this year from it, so that sets me back a whole nother year. But it's something that hopefully I'll be able to leave something behind. There's not a lot of mutations in boas, so to even be part of a project that no one else is in is crazy in this community. So I'm really fortunate to be working with the animals I'm working with.
Absolutely. I think it's probably not one I've seen. I know there was a couple of things like I remember being at Arlington with you. I think it was a year ago now. think it was last September, right? When the Green Annies came out.
I believe so. I was probably set up right behind Justin's table, right?
No, it was at yours right before.
Oh, you're talking
This
about
is like
Stink
right
Discovery one?
when Megan sent you the picture.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. That might have been, God, that might have been almost 2 years ago, buddy.
2 years now? Oh.
I mean, I think it's almost 2 years
Oh.
since that happened. Give or take, this September is going to be 2 years. Crazy enough.
Holy cow. Oh, sorry, little one's broke in.
No,
No, that's, man, I have a horrible memory. No, please
Oh,
go. Please
I think
go.
things are going by a lot faster than they used to be, buddy.
Happens as we get older. One of the things about it though is like so the excitement from that, obviously BOAS hold a dear place in your heart. You see vision in it a little bit more. We talked about a species in our short clip from this previous Arlington, and it's a species that we've both worked with a little bit. I told you I wanted to talk about a little bit because I see that as kind of like the ball pythons of arboreals. And if you're watching the industry right now, arboreals are really they're taking that next popular step, right? Like all the OGs used to work them. Like it was, if you worked a green tree or an emerald, you were at the top of your game, right? I really love ATBs, and I think the color phases in them and what they're doing with them with pattern wise is gonna be the next step.
Yeah. So I'm going to refer to them as the training wheels for arboreal breeders because a lot of people can be very successful with that species. I'm going to give them a second. Me personally, and it all goes back to me kind of getting into the hobby and learning about all what's going on, is I had a pet store in Buffalo, New York. It was called Markheim's Pets. I used to go in there every Friday. There was a gentleman that worked there. His name's Ken Leach. He does sand boas, mainly Kenyan sand boas. And he showed me the ropes, told me about the hobby, told me how to conduct myself at shows, told me that there's no price set in stone, negotiate with everybody you've ever seen at the shows. But they always had a 1.2 group of Amazon tree boas set up on the corner display. They lived together year round, and every year they had a litter. And every year when they had a litter for 3 years, I would go in and I'd pick out my favorite ones. And when I went to the shows, I picked out a couple favorite ones. And I don't know what it was. I think it was just because they were so easy in a sense compared to some of the other arboreals that I was just kind of fascinated with them. And then like, man, over the last 20 years, other than the Europeans, and I know there are a few people in the United States, you haven't really seen a lot. And for a species that's so heavily imported, you would think you'd see a lot of stuff going on. And as you know, you could put a brown to a brown and make a red and a garden fade and yellows.
Loving on those right now, man. Those
Yeah.
red calicos are insane.
I love the calicos. I've always loved the leopard projects. I like the high reds. Man, I don't know for sure. I always thought Don Patterson might have had some too up in Canada. I might be mixing up with some of the other stuff he works with, but I really believe he has some reds that he worked with. I was always very obsessed over. I know for a fact he's got them. I can see them in my head now. But I follow a lot of the pages overseas to see what they're doing. I've even, I don't know how bad of a thing this is, but every year around like August and September, gravid females come into the country. I had half of mine maybe this year to buy a couple gravid females. Wait until they have their litters, separate everything, just kind of have a little foundation group to look at for fun. Maybe I get lucky and there's something in there that a little light bulb comes up above my head that makes me tell me that there's a direction worth going in. But, at some point I need to step back into them. When I was 21, I moved to North Carolina and I changed my collection drastically, just because the move and everything else, and I was poor. I had to get rid of a lot of stuff just to make the move happen. My biggest problem in this hobby, I think, has been I move around so much sometimes that I leave projects behind.
Right.
And because of that, where I should have probably a whole wall unit of Amazon tree boas, I don't have a single Amazon tree boa. But all it's going to take is for me to go to that show and see that one animal I can't live without, and then it's going to be a second and a third and a fourth. But you know, I always tell people too, like, you know, when you have a collection, you get out and you get back in, you learned all the ways not to do it, and your rebuild is always better. So, not that I had this crazy collection of them, but you know, I've been there, I've done that, I had them. Now, when I go back to have them, I'd like to believe I'm going to do a better job at building something cool.
100%. I think that's a valid, very valid thought process. Everyone seems to take that defeat, and even if they step away from the species, they always come back better. As you were saying, they try harder. There's when you bring it back in, there's like a fire lit under your butt that, okay, I proved myself wrong once, I'm not going to let it happen again. Yeah. Or however you want to call it. But what do you think would be kind of like the thing that needs to be seen in ATBs to kind of gain that popularity to really make that industry blossom?
You know, I say this with every species based on the fact that I always say this too, every 5 years we get a new group of people coming into the hobby. 5 years will make or break people. And a lot of people that come in don't want to just work with what everybody's working with. You know, with any species, like even like I'd say with like king rats. There are so many unique king rats in the United States right now that I didn't even realize existed. But now I'm in groups and I'm seeing it exist. I'm like, wow, I want that. I think the same thing when it comes to Amazon tree boas is who's promoting them? Who's got a collection that they're showing off babies? Like, you know, who's talking about projects they've been working on for 10 years and how they got there? Sometimes, honestly, we need to be spoon-fed. You know, we need to be able to show what we can do if we can't see it ourselves. And I don't know anybody doing that. Like I said, I had to think twice about Don Patterson having these animals, and I love Don Patterson. So honestly, I just think if the right person in the hobby had them, started working with them, and started doing things that people thought were worth having around, you know, why wouldn't they want to work with the species? And I think that goes for almost any species right now. And one thing I've noticed in the hobby, again, over the last couple of decades is, you know, every once in a while, ball pythons get tripped up. And when ball pythons get tripped up, ball python breeders like to look at other species. You know, they don't want to go out and create a new market, but they like to see a market that might already be established to jump into. I get a lot of calls about boa constrictors right now, and I don't see why we wouldn't be getting the same calls about an obscure species that isn't even obscure, like Amazon tree boa, if people saw potential in the breeding.
Do you think it has something to do with their nature, or like what people view them as is overly defensive?
Well, here's the thing. I've never really known of arboreal species that want to be overhandled.
Right.
I don't think green tree python guys are taking their animals out 10 times a day to prove it's not going to bite them. I feel like those guys don't even want to touch those animals half the time. So, you know, I do agree with that argument or that idea behind it, because that's like the argument back in the day was blood pythons are the next ball python. But then people are like, yeah, but they're so mean. Like they're going to bite you. They're going to, and same thing with like carpet python stuff. You know, a lot of people stay away from carpet pythons because it's an overly nippy species. Now, I do think that's you're gonna have a smaller group of people willing to work with them because of that. And I think that'll always be a problem with any species that's nippy as babies. But you know, with arboreal stuff, like I just don't think it's an overly handled species that you should be worrying about that. I think with a proper setup, you know, as long as they're set up properly, I mean, I just don't see why you take them out all the time.
No, 100%. I think that's one of the big things that we as an industry sometimes lose sight of too, is we talk about it, but like it's more the attitude as juveniles and as babies, right? But you have to look at the nature of that animal. Like, think about it. An arboreal species is relying on something moving fast in front of its face not knowing, having a split-second decision to either grab it or leave it alone. And you wonder why it's striking at you as a baby while it's still learning its nature and what's been imprinted into its DNA.
Yeah, and also don't forget, similar to like people thinking that all blood pythons are mean, think about the animals you've seen at the show the last 20 years. You've either seen adults that have come directly out of the wild or babies that are captive bred in in a hatchery in another country. And same thing happened with blood pythons is, we got all these young animals in, they were nasty as fuck, and people just thought they were going to be a mean species. But, too, like with a lot of these species, like when I hold the blood python, I cradle it like a baby, like no dangling, like I'm supporting the body weight because I want the animal to feel comfortable. Same thing with Amazon tree boa. Like more than likely when I take it out, it'll come out on a perch. I'll probably hold it. If it bites me, I'm going to overreact because I always overreact when I get bit by small things. And yeah, I mean, that's all there's to it. But I wouldn't allow something that small that nips me to stop me from working with a species like that. As much as I hate getting tagged by things and I'm still a wussy about it, really, you don't even feel it. It's seeing it happen scares the hell out of you.
100%. I agree with that. I remember I've told it, and I'll probably forever share this. One of my first lives when I was on YouTube, one of the very first ones, I went and this is when I still had my ATB, and I held it up to the side of my head, and I wasn't thinking about it. I turned my head to the side and then turned back, and you just see him like mid life, just hold on. I'm like, hold on. And I turn to the side and I continue talking, and like he finally lets go. And then by the end of the live, you just see like it running down the side of my face. I'm like, I should probably put him back and end this before someone gets. But I don't know. It's one of those species that intrigues me because all of them, like they all intrigue me, right? And the genetics behind it all intrigues me. But the polymorphism that we've seen really pop out of them, I think that's giving the ability, much like boa constrictors, much like ball pythons, even bloods. Like you're starting to see a lot more variation in bloods. Granted, it's from multiple localities, and people like to mix the short tails with the bloods. But if you're looking at true bloods versus short tails versus Sumatran, all of it, right? There's a large variance that's coming in all of those that if we just took advantage of, or like you were saying earlier, have the right people that can see it maybe better than you and I can, you're going to make something out of that and build that. I mean, they're very much so the perfect animal for those that like have an eerie fascination for gaboons and rhinoceros vipers, right? And that's what they get compared to a lot of the time is it's a non-venomous Gabby. Unfortunately, I think their temperaments are nowhere near the same, but as far as body size, I could see where the comparison's coming from. But
yeah. And you know what? It might help a pied. Because whenever a pied gets introduced to a species, everybody flocks to the species. As long as it's a good looking pied. I don't think I remember the leucistics back in the day. I don't remember exactly. I thought that was like hypo to hypo breeding, maybe made leucistics back in the day. I hardly ever see them anymore. So there may have been some issues with that. You know what I really liked back in the day, and this might be horrible to say, but green tree python or a Amazon tree boa bred to a
the hybrids.
Yeah.
Oh,
I just saw pictures of one pop up the other day, and it's really wild looking. And I think it was like White Plains back in 2002. Somebody had an emerald to a Amazon tree boa, and they were just red and weird looking. And I do believe a lot of those animals don't make it, as far as I'm aware. But I think at the same show, I saw the Chihuahua to crested gecko. Now that looked awful. That looked like a burn victim. It was really funny looking. But there was something about that emerald to the Amazon. I just really liked it. I'm not really opposed to hybrid stuff. I know sometimes you get these people in the industry that are just like so like hateful about it. You know, I'm not over here doing any hybrids. I did breed an Angolan ball python to a blood ball python cross this year. She slugged out, you know, it happens. Might have been because it was a hybrid. The fact that she went full cycle, I'm not really sure, but it was two animals that were in Ben's collection when I got here. I've always looked at them, and I've been taking care of them for 6 years, and I figured why not? You know, some people don't like it. I mean, that's fine. Just don't do them yourself. And if you are doing them, just be real about it. You know, I remember I heard rumors back in the early 2000s that people were breeding Angolans to ball pythons, then breeding them back to ball pythons a couple times with simple mutations in them and making what looked like a whole new mutation, but really it was the Angolan influence in the animal. You know, there's a little dishonesty there if you're trying to push a mutation that's really just a hybrid. But, you know, I think there's always going to be people that are going to kind of do what they want in the hobby. And that's the good thing about this hobby. It's so big, there's enough room for everybody to do whatever they want.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Let's jump to the big snakes now. Like boas obviously get big, but you also work or have worked larger with Ben's collection. When we're looking at like berms and retics and all that, a lot of us have the mentality, and this is part of where I was trying to go back to that video. A lot of us have that mentality that if we want a big clutch, we have to have a huge animal, right? And I'm trying to find the point in that clip real quick, but
well, I was going to say, because the second half of that clip was
the best effort to get the most out of your large snakes.
Well, and if you can't find it, I think I watched it 4 times today. I could probably do it word for word for you really quick. But if you could find it, like I said, I thought the second half of that clip was one of my favorites. It was cool talking about the animal from the Philadelphia Zoo, but, you know, him talking to a scientist about what these animals were capable of and him explaining to how we do in a captivity compared to what's happening in the wild, I thought was really cool. If you can't find it, I could just say it.
I think this is, I might be off by a little bit, but I think this is about where it is.
Wild snakes I collected or gravid quite a bit. I mean, the number is exponentially higher in captivity. And he said, so what makes you think that your laboratory is the most optimal place? He said, these pythons out here in the Everglades, it's too hot, they can move. They can go underground. They can get in the water. They can get up in a tree. They can bask. They have all of these options, humidity, all of this stuff. You've got an 8-foot casket, and you think that those are optimal conditions? He said, be careful, because if there's ever a record clutch laid, it's going to be out here in the wild, not in captivity. So if 109 was in, and 3 weeks later, now the snake that laid 109.
It's funny that that premonition came about, but
9 eggs was 18 plus feet long. They cut open down in Miami an African rock python that was 15 feet. It's a big snake, but it's not ridiculously huge.
Right.
There were 86 viable eggs in that animal at 15 feet long. My biggest clutch of eggs from a Burmese python was 78, and that was from an 18 plus foot female. So there was 86 from this 14 foot, and I don't know if any of you guys have been down or actually captured wild pythons. But the first wild python I captured, my thought process was, oh my God, this thing is thin. This thing's emaciated in my mind. No, that's what a wild python looks like. We're used to these big fat things laying in these enclosures, getting rabbits tossed at them. And no, they're not thin. So this 15-foot python is not this massive girth animal that had 86 eggs in it. And that's when I started realizing the arrogance that we had of keeping these animals sterile and clean and fed and lighted and all of these different things. And they're in these shoe boxes or you know, rack systems, or even on these big, you know, enclosures that are 8 feet long.
So hearing his point of view, obviously multiple times today, because you love that clip. I love the clip too. I'm gonna go back and watch that full episode. It's been a long
It's a
time
good one.
since I've watched
I think
it.
it's like 3 hours, man, but we never stopped talking. It just kept going. No, I think honestly, that was actually one thing in that conversation that always stood out to me. It was probably the casket comment. I thought was kind of beautiful and sad all at the same time, I guess you could say. But there's a truth there. So I made that post a couple hours ago about that 111 egg clutch, and Michael Barrera jumped in and he made a comment that I believe he said somebody with the FWC talks to says that some of these animals might be using the same nest and putting multiple clutches in there. I think that's very unique. I've never heard it before. Not so much challenging him when I say that, just it wasn't anything I've ever heard before with a python communally nesting, I guess you could say.
Right.
So I'm probably going to hit him up because I definitely want to hear more about that. I don't know enough about it myself to even say anything. So either that animal did have 111 eggs, which in Graziani 3 years ago, he made the comment like, when the record's broken, it'll happen in the wild. Now, I don't remember if that 111 was the record of all time or if there's been bigger ones found, but you're hearing all these litter or clutches right now of like 80 and 90. And, if you know anybody in the Burmese python community, like, these animals have been out there for 30 years, ever since Hurricane Andrew. And a lot of people in the Burm community talk about how it's like the old school giants, like the old giant berms, because a lot of the berms that are getting in now are coming from regions where they're smaller. So, like, some people really want that old school bloodline. And where Graziani's talking about that 18-foot animal, it's probably very similar bloodlines that were collected and brought into the country that it was able to produce 100 eggs. So, if in captivity we had 109 on an animal like that, we could probably get maybe 120 in the wild, maybe 130, maybe less, maybe more. I'm sure we're going to see bigger litter or bigger clutches every year with this species in the wild. I think what's happening there is out of our control at this point. I think it's going to be more adapting to them than anything. The problem is with those arguments, though, like I ran into a guy on the beach in Florida one time, and he was talking about how they're decimating the Everglades, how you don't see any mammals anywhere ever down there. And I don't know enough about it. I believe that they have to be fucking up the food chain in some way. I just don't know how bad. I also don't even have any idea how many animals actually are out there. I think Graziani in that same video said that it takes 200 hours of looking to find one snake, but I know guys that go out and find 7 in one night. So I don't know, man. I think sometimes we downplay the problem, but I think we also upplay it at the same time.
I think it's a little bit of both, and I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna be one of those people, but I am gonna be one of those people right now, I guess, is the best way of saying it. So the Everglades, for those that don't know, a lot of that was like if you look in the history of the Everglades where it starts, a lot of that's already been taken out and turned into cane fields for sugar cane. Sugar is actually one of Florida's biggest crops because it's in literally everything, to the point where it controls politics. But that's one of the things that they've wanted to kind of push everything out of, because if we can get everything cleared out of that, and we say, well, the only way to fix this issue is to do what we do with all our other farmland and clean it and burn everything out. Not that you can burn Everglades out, but like, you know what I mean with that. And then plant more sugar, obviously, because profit is more important than ecosystems, apparently. But what do you think we could take from what we're learning out there and like what we're seeing with the natural interaction within an ecosystem versus what we're doing here in captivity? Like Graziani said, they look, what did he say? He said emancipated or something like that.
Emaciated,
Emaciated.
not like, I'm probably well, like a month ago, we were all talking about Savannah monitors again, and that's always been one of my arguments. Is in the wild they look emaciated, they don't look obese. I think they mainly eat bugs in the wild, and they're built differently. In captivity, we found they ate dog food, so we just shoveled dog food down their throats. I do believe that we overfeed in the hobby. I think that a weekly schedule is nice and all because, we stay on track. But I think it's been proven with a lot of breeders over the years, and maybe they don't talk about it publicly, but, one breeder, I talked to Vin Russo about it. He's all like, you could feed them more. They're just going to shit more. They're not taking in the nutrients. They're not taking in as much as you think they are. They're just shitting it out. I find that spacing my meals out with my ball pythons is actually better. Now, that means I'm not getting my males up to size in 6 months like some other people are. But, they get there when they get there, and they breed when they breed. I think that's one problem I've had in the hobby. I've never been in a hurry to do anything. And the bigger the collection gets, I think less of a hurry you're in, where in the beginning, when you only have like 2 or 3 animals, you're like, I want these fuckers breeding right now. Like, I'm ready. But once your collection gets bigger, you'll find everything just kind of comes in time. But I don't know if we've ever done the science behind even like a feeding schedule for a ball python. You have some people argue that power feeding an animal doesn't affect it, and they've opened them up and the organs are all the right size. I have some doubts. But even like Graziani in that conversation we had with him about the original pastel male ball python he imported, he raised it for 6 years before he bred the fucking thing. He got it to like, I don't even remember how big, maybe 1,200 grams, and then bred it for the first time. That's not how we do things now. Our logic is completely different. But that also goes for certain species. There's a lot of other species where guys are slow growing. Boa constrictors, it's been proven over and over again that these animals don't need to be big. You can slowly raise a Colombian over 5 to 6 years, have it at 5 to 7 pounds and breed it and get a perfect litter. Female puts all her weight back on after just a few meals. And vice versa, you have an animal that's 2.5 years old, 10 to 14 pounds. You breed it, it gives you a nice big litter, and then you probably don't want to breed it the next year. And it's not like we need to breed these animals every year anyways. That's not necessarily the point I was trying to make with that, but you're taking the same animal, you're raising it 2 completely different ways, and you're getting the same outcome. Babies, viable babies. So again, I go back to the first 2 minutes. However you do your ways to do this right now.
Was that on your end or my end? I lost you for a second.
It's hard to say. It got a little
It got a little choppy for a second.
I live in the country. It might be me. How bad was it? We can move on to the next thing.
There was like a 2 or 3 second pause in the middle of what you were saying, but
nobody missed anything then. I'm sure I just repeated myself.
Sure.
But yeah, dietary stuff, man. Like, I think we're gonna learn new ways of doing this, and there might be some pushback. I mean, I'm sure when we find out we only need to feed an adult female ball python 9 times a year, there's going to be a campaign from all the rodent breeders that we're just being assholes and too cheap about it. We're never going to be able to keep everyone happy, but, I have talked to breeders that do larger meals, more spaced out with adult ball pythons, and they breed every year compared to that weekly small to medium-sized rat. But again, for what works with one person might not work for another person.
I get that 100%. Can you see what's on there? I don't know if you're on your phone or your computer, but David from Synerg Morphs said, I hear there's 5 to 7 species of hybrids in the Everglades. Is that even possible, or are they referring to locality?
Hybrids in the Burms? Is he strictly talking Burmese pythons?
I think he's talking between Burmese and the retics that are out there. I don't know if
are there retics out there, like actually
allegedly,
documented surviving retics? I don't know if it was something I listened to or read recently where they talked about in Hurricane Andrew, reticulated pythons also were released during that and they never made it. I don't think the climate was where it needed to be. Kind of like that town in Florida that had the litter of boa constrictors years ago. So hybrids, I mean, maybe African rocks to berms. I mean, if they're in the same area, that could easily hybridize, but 5 or 6, he might be meaning different. I don't know. Maybe I don't know enough. I don't know enough about Burmese pythons to know how many different subspecies or localities there are.
I'm not sure. He just said big snakes in general.
Right.
From what I know, it's just rocks and berms. I know they said something about retics being out there. I've never seen anyone pull one except for like something that has a morph to it. It isn't a wild type, and you could tell it was like a staged event. So
yeah, I do know, and not a lot of people know this. If you know, you know, though, that there is a wild population of labyrinth Burmese pythons in the wild in a certain area. And I think they've seen them there multiple times. So I think that was the only time I ever heard of a mutation, because I think that was one of the arguments early on with US ARC back in like 2005 and 6-ish. You're not finding greens, you're not finding albinos, you weren't finding labyrinths back then, you were finding your common wild type. And I think I could be wrong, but I thought Warren Booth might have been part of a study. They were finding were very closely related. So it wasn't like this crazy diverse gene pool where there was like hundreds of pets being released and mingling. It was like there was almost like a small foundation of related animals that started everything.
I could believe that. I mean, you've seen it enough in other species. Ball python's the prime example, right? Like you throw this, even throwing the same genetics, you're going to eventually get some weird mutation that pops up within that gene pool, right?
Yeah.
That's just kind of the way genetics work when you keep producing them. But so going back to the feeding and kind of my thought process on it, and this is something I took from Will, and I've taken from a couple of other people that I've talked to, is and it's something that I've always done, and people look at me like I'm a little bit crazy for, is I give a fasting period, because I very much believe in, okay, try to make that dry period, and then when it comes into a breeding period, let's simulate it the best way we can. So if I deprive, it sounds bad, I'm going to say deprive. If I deprive you for a month of eating, which an adult ball python is going to be fine, or pretty much any other type of python, even other species, are going to be fine with a month with no food. They're meant to find and search. And then I put you back onto a very strong feeding regimen and increase your humidity, increase all, not to like an unsafe level. People don't clip that and say I'm like doing some weird scientist stuff. I'm not. I'm keeping everything within safe measures, but I try to simulate rain season coming in and all that good stuff. But
so that's the Tracy Barker method, I believe. Stimulating the wet season, the dry season. Dry season, there's no food, no reason to breed. During the wet season, food's plentiful, build follicles, have your babies. You know, there's got to be food there for when your babies hatch. So there is a logic behind that. And honestly, we do a lot of food cycling. I don't consider it starving an animal. You know, if we want to make the argument, we want to have it exactly how they are in the wild. I believe I've read that some ball pythons will stay underground for months during the dry season and not come out for even a drink of water if it was even available. So now we're talking about an animal living underground for 2 or 3 months without water. Why do we think that not feeding them for 2 or 3 months is so detrimental to their health? I do think that most species we work with will have obesity to it. You know, I've seen certain guys like, you know, Ray Gerge had this amazing blue-tongue skink year where he produced, I think, 450 babies. And I think in the United States, probably the biggest year anybody's had. His feeding schedule was very different from a lot of other people. You know, he wasn't power feeding. He wasn't getting babies up to breeding size in 6 to 8 months. he fed them when he fed them. And, you know, none of them looked fat, none of them looked skinny, and they all bred for him. And everything was successful. So, you know, we can argue when they're fat, they breed fine. We can argue when they're skinny, they breed fine. Now, I do think the amount of meals you give them during the follicle development is one of the most crucial things to this. You know, the size of the meal you give them during the follicle development, so on and so forth. Even in BOAs, like you could feed a gravid BOA, just don't give it a large meal. You don't want anything pressing up against developing babies.
Right.
So again, man, I hate to say it. Everything that we say right now is opinion based. I have not read any papers. I've not seen any papers or studies come out. And, you know, I always tell people, like, you know, I have my ideas about things, but these are my opinions on my experiences. I would love to debate somebody on it because I fucking love debating everything. And I love to be wrong as much as I'm right sometimes. But, again, broken record over here, and you know, maybe I'm just saying this because I love talking to the newbie coming up, but you just got to find out what works for you, and that's it, man. Whatever works for you is all that matters.
So here's my thought process on it, at least, is much like, and this is something I was taught from my medical background and something I talked about with my mentor, and we kind of agreed upon it, is you see a lot of people come on to shows because they want to have a baby, like namely The Biggest Loser, right? Like you get a bunch of these 500-pound women and men that become infertile due to being obese. They have to lose that weight to safely be able to carry a offspring. Because of how fast we can sometimes feed these animals, or how much we overfeed these animals, they become obese. Well, what effect is that having, one, not only on that animal's health, but the offspring's health? Because if the mom is struggling because of fatty liver or fat deposits on the heart or what have you because of being obese, what is that passing down to the kids? Is that making them underdeveloped? Is that why we're seeing, like, I understand genetically you're gonna have that genetic mutation where sometimes we get that shark mouth or what have you, or the kink issues or something like that. But is there a base of it to where, okay, maybe there's something in the mom that we're doing by overfeeding, or just something that we're doing to her that created stress during development, and then we throw it? Because I can tell you right now, in my incubator, I've never had an issue. Everything comes out. I'm 100%, which is amazing, and hopefully it stays that way forever. But the chances of that happening, watching over time with everyone, is 0%, right? But for right now, I have that going. I very much so believe that what you see in the parent, you're going to see in the offspring. Like if you look at like an autistic person, right? That autism goes down in each generation, whether it's as high on the spectrum or lower on the spectrum. So whether it's a weight thing and you're creating a health issue for the mom, that's going to get passed down to the babies. Maybe that underdevelops them. Maybe that's why some of them have issues when they're first coming out of the egg. It takes them a little bit longer to get onto food or something like that. I don't know. It's just me spitballing stuff at this moment, but you know what I mean?
I guess my take on that is metabolism. I mean, if metabolism could be passed on inherently, which I know it is in humans, that'd be one thing. But like, when you're talking about obesity in animals, I mean, that's your fault. Like, it's
No, I
if
100%
your
agree with
cat's
that.
fat, your cat's fucking fat because you fed it too much. So like, it's really hard to say if obesity in a reptile can be passed on generationally because it's our fault they're obese in the first place. But, you know, will that affect those offspring's metabolism and how they develop? Maybe. Like Russian fox breeders, they held back the nicest of the foxes, the most friendly, and they did generational breeding. So eventually they had a domesticated fox. And that I think has happened over the last like 20 to 40 years. I don't know what the timeline in that is. Very similar to like what we did with dogs. You know, the wolves in the pack that were the friendliest are the ones we kept around and started working together with. And then eventually we domesticated them. So I think that's a tough one. Yeah, I do think that's Mother Nature not allowing certain animals to reproduce when they're obese. Maybe there's something there. I have a lot of faith in Mother Nature to an extent, except when it comes to like Partho boa litters where the babies all die anyways. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why would Mother Nature do that in the first place? But, you know, I do think there are some stuff that's inheritable, but I think in the obesity conversation, I mean, that's so tough, man. Like I said, I don't know if that's more us or more the animals, and I don't know if an obese mom would make inheritably obese babies. I do know there's probably been some like side-by-side studies with feeding animals from similar litters different diets to see what's going to happen. But, you know, I don't think that, again, when it comes to ball pythons, we have such a large sample size when it comes to a species, yet we've done nothing on the science side for this species. The genetic testing we have right now is the first thing that's really even come up for that species. And, I mean, I find it all very interesting. I definitely think it was a selfish way for us to know a thing, which is fine. You know, it's, you know, here's the tough thing too about this industry. You know, it talks to like the moral ends of things, and we're all over the place. I told you this was going to happen before we started this conversation, but, you know, I have some people I talk to that compare this to farming, and they make comments how as much as we treat it like farming, we don't. You know, farming animals are heavily medicated. And I do have a friend in the hobby, and he doesn't do this because his animals are sick, but he does a Baytril drip with his animals leading up to their cool down. And then when he brings them out of cool down, he does another Baytril drip. I won't get into the details of measurements or how many times he does it, but it's something he does almost for like a boost in the immune system, a reset of the system for the animal. When he started doing that, his collection thrived. He didn't do it because he had a problem, but he knows when we keep animals in these even perfect conditions in these small enclosures, there will still be bacteria buildup in the animal. And I've heard the argument a lot too with like, you're talking about shark jaws and kinking in your animals. Some people don't put into consideration that it might not be a malfunction in their incubator, but it could have been a bacteria passed down from mom in the egg that affected the development of the animal. Same thing with a live bear like a boa. So the practice of taking care of reducing the bacteria in an animal before breeding it like you would with chickens, cows, and goats, where that might be foreign to us, it shouldn't be, and someday it might be common practice. But again, you know, the reptile industry is such a young industry compared to all these other industries, so there's still so much stuff we're learning, and we've been at this for 3-4 decades now.
Absolutely. So I want to touch on one more thing with feeding, just because everyone's point is going to differ on this, right? Power feeding, it's a term that's thrown around all the time. Let's face it. Like if you feed more than me and I feel like I'm not getting the product, as people would put it, or the production that I think I should off of the meal that I'm providing my animal, I'm going to say you're power feeding, right? Because that makes me feel good about myself and put me in a positive spotlight. Whereas, oh, maybe I'm alienating you, and which is another thing we don't need to go to, but I'm just saying. So in the terms of power feeding, what would you say is a power feeding? Like for those that are just coming into the industry, they're hearing this term, they don't quite understand it. What would you say is a true power feeding to, let's say, ball pythons, because most of the viewers that watch it are going to be ball python.
Well, how about this? It's power feeding when the body structure of the animal is not keeping up with proper development. If somebody shows off an animal with a teeny weeny little head and this big fucking sausage body, you know, we can make an argument, but, you know, again, ball python just being this like kind of, again, you know, people like to turn your words, but perfect beginner species in the hobby because they're almost bulletproof. You can overfeed them, you can underfeed them. Most people who don't know how to breed snakes can be successful breeding ball pythons. You can set up the eggs 40 different ways and get them to hatch. You know, so many other species are so challenging. I always, you know, I say it too, and I'm going to bounce back to it, but like, you know, the nice thing about the ball python is it's such a good introductory level animal. Like, it's a confidence builder for somebody who might not have confidence in breeding reptiles. And when they come in and all of a sudden they're successful, maybe they decide to go womas, maybe they decide to go scrubs. Maybe they find something in the hobby they like more than ball pythons, but ball pythons got them in where if Joe Schmo comes in and buys some scrubs, tries for 4 years to breed them, and it's not successful, he's probably getting out of the hobby. Joe Schmo comes in, has a couple of years of ball pythons, transitions into another species, now has experience in the hobby, maybe more successful with that species because he started with ball pythons. But like I said, ball pythons are a really horrible example of this because, again, I've seen people what you would consider power feeding, and you don't really see a difference in the animal. You don't see tiny heads. You don't see weird body structure. You don't hear about animals rolling that often. And like I said, I've had people argue with me that the organ development in a ball python, even when power fed, looks normal to any other snake that died at the same weight at the same age. So, again, hearsay, but, you know, as long as it doesn't show up in the structure of the animal, you know, you're not doing it completely wrong, but I do believe in slow growing at this point. You know, even our female ball pythons, sometimes I don't breed them till they're 4 or 5 years old. Sometimes they'll be ready at 3 years old, and sometimes I still wait a little bit longer. Maybe that's a bad thing. I don't really know. It's just, you know, there's so many animals. Like I said, sometimes it's focus on an area, do what you want to do this year. Everything else is next year. But as long as the body structure of the animal looks good, that's all I'd worry about. If you're noticing structurally the animal's developing weird, I'd say dial it back. You might be power feeding without even realizing it.
I like that. Let's kind of jump into your breeding again. We've kind of bounced around a little bit. I'm notorious for this, obviously. I can't keep on a topic for
I'm the same. Almost well, buddy. We talked about this before we even got started today.
Yeah. So the difference that you find with boas versus, say, pythons, and you've worked a couple of different species of each, obviously. The live bearing versus the egg bearing. When you're trying to kind of bring that person into breeding, say, a boa from the ball python life, like we understand eggs, like you were saying, are very simple. Maybe on like your Australian species or even some of your Indo or Papua New Guinea, it can be a little bit more difficult. Well, it can be a lot more difficult, but it's as difficult as you really make it, right? But for the most part, your typical industry pythons that everyone sees, for the most part, if you get those eggs in the incubator, as long as you keep the humidity up and you keep it at a pretty much decent temperature, like you can have some fluctuation, you're gonna see babies, right? Whereas I feel like live birth is a little bit more difficult. You see a lot more either stillborn, or maybe it's just that they didn't develop properly. I'm not sure how I need to term this. What are some differences between the egg to the live that you've really had to consider over the years, or like some of the things that you think about jumping between each?
Well, how about this? When I got into breeding reptiles, I went with species that were live bearers because I didn't want to fuck up eggs. I figured it was one more step for me to make a mistake. So I was happy working with skinks and boas that were live bearers. Honestly, I don't think there's a very big difference. You know, everybody likes to talk about the horror stories in boas. But then there's a million great stories about BOAS, how everything went right. So, okay, how about this? So when you walk by your incubator, what is the first thing you do when you walk by?
Leave it alone.
You ever check the temperature? You make sure you
Yeah, I look at the
thermostat's right?
thermostat when I walk by. Yeah.
Yeah, I always look at my thermostats. I'm looking for 88 across the board. With live bears, are you temp gunning your animals? Are you making sure that there's nothing going wrong? Where it's more leave them alone and let them do their thing, you still have to make sure their settings are right. And where I would think in the wild there'd be big fluctuations in temperatures. Dave Kaufman did that video in Africa where they temp gunned a ball python on eggs underground, and it was what, like 88.3 degrees or some shit like that. So it was fucking perfect. Maybe more perfect than some incubators are. I just think with live bears, because again, blue tongue skinks and everything else, you still got to pay attention to their settings. You might be wanting to temp gun a little bit more. Again, the same thing is walking by your incubator. The temperature is the most important thing. Don't slip up if you're doing live bears. That hot spot is very important. You take it away from them, you're probably gonna have some development issues. Talking again back to obesity, buddy. A big fat fucking boa constrictor with a bunch of big fatty build up inside their body. I couldn't think of a more clever word. So you got developing babies with all this fucking fat pushing against the developing baby, and then you're wondering why you get stillborns, why you get preemie litters, so on and so forth. I don't think live bearers are any harder than egg layers, in all honesty.
Okay. I lost you for a second.
Can't get it right sometimes. But for the most part,
I lost you for a second. Hold on.
Oh,
I
it's
heard
gonna happen.
honesty, and then it went blank.
Do you think it's me or do you think it's you?
I don't know, but it's driving me nuts.
You know what you should do? Next time you can't hear me, put your hand up in the air, and I'll just stop talking. No, I'm just saying with live bears, man, fatty cells or fatty deposits pushing against animals. Your settings being right in your incubator are no different than your settings being right in a rack system or cage with a live bear. So I do think it's up to you to keep an eye on certain things, because anything that can go wrong will go wrong in reptiles.
I get that.
I know there might not have been a right answer, but did I stay on track there? Was that
No,
what
I
you
like
were
it.
doing?
Absolutely. I think it's very much so. I think what it boils down to, man, is you have to work with what you like, and you have to find what you actually like. And sometimes that means going through multiple species to find that, right? Like I've had upwards of, I think at one time I had 10 different species in my collection at one time. And I found in the room that I was working everything out of, it was too much. I couldn't keep everything properly, and I was having issues because of it. And I had to let a lot of stuff go, or I found people that wanted to breed it. And I was like, okay, well, let's work out terms. You can have it for X amount of time. And hopefully when I'm ready to bring it back, we have more room. Now we're still at, God, I think I'm at 10 species, but they're spread throughout the entire house, and I only breed 2 of them. So it's not a big deal.
So I think for anybody new coming in the hobby, and it's a mistake that I made early on, I was called a Noah's Ark breeder because I bought a pair of every species. And then you realize that, depending on the space you have or whatever else, you might not be able to have the most ideal conditions for every one of them. It's a balancing act at that point to kind of keep them all going. And that's why I tell people, if you're a colubrid guy, cool. Be a colubrid guy. Have your cool down room. My cool down room has colubrids in it, and it has blackhead pythons in it, and it has blue tongue skinks in it. All animals that can be cooled down to about the same temperature to create a cycle. Awesome. But I couldn't have boas in there. I couldn't have ball pythons in there. I'd be rolling racks in, rolling racks out. So, there's nothing wrong with working with a lot of different species, as long as, there's got to be a constant. There's got to be similarities in the species enough to where the husbandry is properly maintained. The temperatures are properly maintained. The humidity is properly maintained. Put 20 species in the room, you'll be successful too, and the other 18 will never be doing shit for you.
Right. But that also falls into, what do you want to do with it, though? Like, a lot of us, we look at it as a breeder standpoint, right? Because that's kind of what we do. If I jump into a species, I'm probably going to breed it. And that's one of my downfalls. Like, I have a lot that I don't breed right now, but it's because I don't have the capability to do so. So I'm being responsible in that aspect, but I know once I get a bigger area where I can expand it, all 10 species are probably getting bred.
Yeah. Why not, though? Like,
why
I find
not?
it very
But
fulfilling, man.
why do we have to? Why do we have to get our hands on species? Devil's advocate this, and what?
Well,
I'm breeding the
here's the thing.
retic, Mike. So just get over it.
Yeah, the reason that you say things like that, or why we say things in modern day culture, is because we always assume somebody else is going to come at us with some kind of crazy, how can you do this? You know, like I said, I think that's one of the most tragic things about the hobby, where it becomes more about the people and less about the animals, is, you know, there's a space in this hobby for everybody. You know, if you venture outside of your bubble, you might find people you don't like and whatever else. And if you allow them to drag you down, I mean, that's on you. It's impossible to police everything about this hobby. You know, what we think we might be morally doing right at one point, we might find out 10 years later we were doing it wrong the whole time. AKA Savannah monitors. Every person has done Savannah monitors wrong. You know, the joke is you don't see adults, and people in captivity with them. Who's bred the darn things? I've seen like maybe one person in captivity get eggs. I've seen hypos, I've seen albinos, I've seen aneurysthristics, I've seen T positives. I've never seen one reproduced, and I don't think you ever will, because we're not keeping them properly. And you know, Bolins are a good example. I bring them up a lot. They've been in the hobby for 30 years. I could tell you maybe 4 or 5 people in the United States successful over 30 years and working with that species. You know, you have guys like Ari going out in the wild and actually documenting how these animals are and their temperature ranges and their diets. And I always call them the Hanses because I don't remember their first names, but the father-son breeding trio or duo in Germany that I want to say they've been successful 3 or 4 years in a row with Boelen's pythons. It wasn't that the species was impossible, it's that we were treating them like any other python. So does that mean every asshole for the last 20 years needs to be persecuted for keeping their Bolins wrong? You know, there's a learning curve, but man, this hobby's so much happier when you just stay in your lane. You know, be pissed off, you know, do your part. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. Just you know, when you focus on the animals and your little bubble, everything is just wonderful. It's when you start venturing out that I feel you just get pulled into bullshit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's dive into a species that I know absolutely nothing about. Well, maybe a little bit, tiny bit. Not enough to have an intelligent conversation. So this is my learning portion of the show, and it's a species that you've talked about a few times on this episode, and that's blue-tongued skinks. What brought you to blue-tongued skinks, and what's that drive behind the passion that you have with them? Because it's something that you've had for a significant amount of time now, and you've continued to push. I know you've talked to other people about projects moving around the States.
Yeah. So I think like any species, when I got exposed to one, I fell in love with it. You know, okay, I'm giving you life stories, by the way, but when I lived in Buffalo, New York, and I graduated high school, I wasn't qualified for shit. I could hardly read. I was an artist. I didn't have a whole lot to do, so I got a temp job and I made postage stamps. At that job, there was a lady there. I go on my break, and there was a reptile book on one of the tables, and this lady named Mary that ran rare reptiles in Buffalo, New York. It was a reptile rehab where you could have a yearly membership, and if you ever had medical issues, you could bring your animals in and she would help you, and if she couldn't, she would direct you to a vet to work with. But she had baby blue tongue skinks born at her place one time, and I saw these things, and I was all like, "This is the best fucking thing I've ever seen." I think I've always kind of had a fascination with Australian species. Maybe that's growing up watching Steve Irwin and just loving Australia, but like, there's always been like want for everything Australian. And then I went out and I got one, and then I sold it, and then I went out and got another one. And then that one animal was the first one I had ever bred, and it just kind of carried on from there. And there was a long point in the hobby where nobody wanted them. It wasn't really talked about. And then Barczyk went to Australia, came back after seeing Joe Ball's collection, started talking about him on Snake Bites. Me and him were pretty close back then. We talked a good bit. He starts telling me about blue tongue skinks. I'm like, I have blue tongue skinks. And for the next couple of years, he bought every baby I produced. We used to talk blue tongue skinks all the time. And with him talking about them on Snake Bites, it created a new community. You had previous people in the hobby that thought about working with it, but didn't, maybe because the demand wasn't there. And suddenly when the demand was there, a lot of people I thought jumped into it. And again, the good thing about that is people made weird stuff and I bought it. Me and Cheryl, like the whole industry at one point with blue tongue skinks, after Brian made them popular, you'd wake up and you check fauna, and then you check king snake, and then you check fauna, and then you check king snake. And if an ad was up for more than 30 seconds, that was a long fucking time for a blue tongue skink. The want and the demand was way higher than the supply. And that went on for about 2 years as everybody built. And then what we found out afterwards, in my opinion, is there was only a few of us buying them. And we were buying them in large amounts. Like Brian, I think, bought over 200. Bill Brandt bought over 200. And a lot of people didn't even know he was buying those animals. So a species that there wasn't a lot around in the first place, there was now a heavy demand. And we went from $80 to $120 an animal to $450 to $650 for a normal. And now we've leveled back out at about $200 to $300. The only thing that kind of is a bummer about the skink breeding or community right now is we lost a lot of breeders. And when we sell these animals now, people aren't buying them as pets. And that's tragic. No, it's not tragic they're buying them as pets, but we have less eyes on this species that people want to work with them. And because of that, things are going to slow down on new things being created. While I'm talking about this, I don't know if you're able to bring up that picture I sent you earlier, the 3 different colored northern blue tongues. It was over Messenger.
Just a moment. Let me get it up for you.
No, for sure. But like, even like, another cool thing going on in the hobby right now is and I hate that I don't know her name. I should feel, but KO Reptiles or KO Skinks. But okay, really quick about those, and we'll jump over. But so that one in the back was made by Frank Payne. And that was Rebecca and Diana lineage for dark stuff that he put together. The one on the top right over there was produced by Scott down in Texas, and that was from Andrew Siki lineage of Sunsets. And then that one up front is one produced here from Jeff Greenline Red. I believe we bred that to a Turner White and then bred babies back to each other to make that animal right there. Or it was from an animal we marked Amber that we bred red twos and then bred reds back to. But 2 things about that picture that I fucking love. Number 1, those are fucking beautiful. And number 2, we only produced one of those 3 animals there. Fortunately, other people that had a different idea in a different direction produced the blacks and produced a sunset like that. So, when you have a community with a lot of people in it, you start seeing things like that where I can go and buy from people and not spend 6 years working on a project. Also, what I found with this species is you could take a nice red and breed it to a classic, and then you could breed the babies from that mother either back to dad or another red lineage animal, and right away you are getting these absolutely phenomenal looking reds. I've always compared this species to crested geckos on the way that the market changes. We only got in like 450 crested geckos initially, and we now have 6 mutations, I want to say. Like actual mutations, not like you're talking your Harlequins or your Dalmatians or any other line bred stuff or poly or whatever you want to call those mutations, but true mutations. Blue tongue skinks has that. But we've had one thing pop up in the United States, and I kind of want to do a little history thing on it because I find it very fascinating. A guy named James Fenn has been doing it for about 25 to 30 years, produced a white northern years ago. He's based in Arizona. After he produced that animal, a gentleman down in Texas named Cohen bred normal blue tongues together and made white blue tongue skinks, pure northern stuff. I bought a very nice male from him that was not white, but had this really cool kind of brownish tan color to it. And Cheryl bought an animal, I think off of Craigslist in Syracuse, New York. That was also an animal produced by Cohen that was produced the same year he made his whites. So we raised those animals up and bred them together, and we made a white. We had some complications. I'm not going to get in details because I don't want to talk shit about anybody, but we had some dietary problems. So we ended up losing all the babies that we produced from that. Inevitably ended up losing mom, and really the project ended. But the cool thing is KO, I don't know if it's KO Skinks or KO Reptiles, but she now has white blue tongue skinks. Very similar characteristics to the stuff produced by Fenn, Cohen, and us. So I'm going to have to guess based on our gene pool that more than likely there's maybe X amount of these heads floating around, and different collections could start producing these animals if you get lucky with the right pairings, or if you know what the parents were initially. That was a long-winded thing, but that's almost like the whole history of this thing. Like skinks were nothing, then they were something for about 3 years, and now they're back to just being pets. And where reds were selling for $800 to $2,500, they're now selling for $400 to $600, and they're not selling like they were. And there's also a project called, I think we're calling them ivories here, but it's another white lineage of northern blue tongue, similar to what you see in Australia. And 18 months ago, if you wanted one, they were $12,000. A month ago, I saw a picture of Petco with one for sale for $999. And I was told the other day that when they had their 50% off sale, this guy went in with a extra 20% off and got one for $300. Literally, I know people that spent $12,000 on an animal 18 months ago. And that really kind of shows that there's not a lot of breeders in that community, but more people breeding for pets. Similar to what we're talking about with Amazon tree boas, I got a lot of faith in that species, man. The color diversity, it's a very calm species, easy to work with. I really still believe that they're going to have this moment, but it's going to need someone to promote the species. KO doing what they're doing with what they're calling creamsicles. Guys like Ron St. Pierre, who I don't know if you follow him, man, but him and his girl are fucking blowing out blue tongues right now. They're doing weird shit that no one was able to do before. I think that's going to go a long way in the community. And I think between KO, Cheryl, me, Manny at Tiki Geckos, numerous other people that are still doing it, guys like Austin and so on and so forth, but I'm not as involved as I used to be. I do think that the species could shine again, but there's even a point with Brian where he wanted to come by and do some videotaping, and I was like, can we do some blue tongues? And he said no, because they weren't getting clicks anymore. For whatever reason, they peaked, and then they fell off the face of the earth like the next day, it felt like. And, again, with the hobby resetting every 5 years, even if a species wasn't popular 20 years ago, it could still be very popular tomorrow. Right. Loma pythons, $250 to $800 on females over 2 years. That all came down to the supply being low and the demand being high. And that's what it's going to be with all these species. It's going to come down to who's producing them, how many they're producing, and how many people actually want to buy these things. Doomrel boas, buddy. Fuck, nobody wanted Doomrel boas. I saw Doomrels as high as $1,200.
Away.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. And you know, you never really know when this stuff's going to be popular, but the reality is if you work with any species long enough, it's probably going to have its day of being popular. That was a weird history lesson on skinks, but northern blue-tongued skinks, the only thing we're lacking right now is we can't tell you what the babies are sex-wise. We need to create a shed test for sexing like they do with the chondros. Warren Booth has already told me this is possible. It's my fault for slacking and a few other people, but I do believe that it'll be easier to sell the higher end mutations for that if people actually know what they're buying. When people are doing a 50-50 chance on an animal, they're not going to buy 2 or 3 animals. You know, they want to know what they're investing in. And we don't have that right now in skinks. So I think that hurts us a little bit.
I think that's a fair assessment. What about the overall care for them? I know we're getting close to where we need to start closing up a bit, but
well, we got 19 minutes, but we're going to take this right to the very end. And I'm just going to get the fuck out of here. So we're going to fit in as much as possible. Okay, skink care. So northerns need to be kept a little drier. Too much humidity, you could have RI issues. You got to be careful though, because sometimes they get stuck shed on their toes. If you don't pick their shed off, they can lose a toe. They'll lose circulation from the shed building up. You know, we like aspen bedding. Some people do cypress, a little on the drier side. Substrate is kind of up to you because the Australians use paper with a pile of hay in the back. Dietary stuff. I know a lot of people that do a lot of different diets. For me personally, what has worked is Purina canned dog food. And then I buy frozen peas, frozen carrots, frozen spinach, frozen kale. I buy frozen blueberries. Sometimes I'll buy frozen raspberries. I buy frozen beef liver. I buy chicken liver, chicken gizzards, chicken hearts. And then we have chickens, so I collect all the eggs. I put all that frozen stuff in the Ninja, puree it up really nice. I make scrambled eggs with all the eggs I collect from the yard. Throw it in a bucket and I mix it up. And then I feed it to them. If I go in there with a tray of eggs and a tray of my mixture, they're going to eat all the eggs and probably leave the mixture. So I find that mixing all these ingredients together so they have to eat it is good for them. The beef liver. I add beef liver because I think it was after World War I or World War II. We started taking gross things out of canned dog food because we were supposed to be able to eat it ourselves. My knees are fucking everything up. It's getting that zoom in and out. But so I like to put beef liver back in because, you know, my argument's always been look at an animal in the wild. Look at when the wildebeest gets taken down. The first thing that all these animals eat are the organs, where all the nutrients are. And then they go to the meat and the flesh. So with canned dog food, we take all the organs out. I want to put some back in. That's why I like adding beef liver. Now, we did have an issue in the industry years ago where there was a can of food that we were using that actually killed a bunch of animals. I believe that was a beef. I think it was beef, and it was bought at Tractor Supply. Unfortunately, there was something on how they either put the animals down or whatever, but we had catastrophic losses across the community. A lot of people lost animals. So that's why I kind of like do a lot of the mixture myself. I stick with Purina because there's not a lot of recalls of Purina. And, you know, I'd like to add the extra things for fun. I know people that do straight dog food and they're successful. And, you know, that's another species too, like with babies, you could feed them every day and they're probably gonna eat every day and they grow really fucking fast. The Australians get them up to breeding size in 8 to 9 months sometimes. And I do think people in the United States have done the same with almost daily meals. I feed them pretty heavy the first few months, and then I slow it down a little bit to where I might feed every day or every other day the first 3 months. By month 3, I'm probably only feeding twice a week. And then when they get to adulthood, I'm doing a wet diet maybe once a week or every other week. And then I'm doing, I keep dry cat food in there with a lot of them. Unless they gorge on it, then I'll take it away from them. Okay. Again, what works for me. And then when it comes to breeding, there's a cooling process. You know, different people in the industry are going to do them at different times. I find by Thanksgiving, it's time to stop eating. I wait a week or two for them to digest their last meal. I then start dialing the temperatures down, and they should be breeding by Valentine's Day. If I'm not breeding by Valentine's Day, I'm probably making a mistake. So Thanksgiving, get your last meal. Valentine's Day, they got to be banging. But a lot of people start actually cycling them earlier than Valentine's Day. I'm seeing a lot of people lock in the industry around like December every year now. And our success rate is decent here. I wish I had more males in my collection. I feel like I could accomplish more. Some males lose interest some seasons and just don't want to do anything.
Is that a brood mating species, or is that?
It's a brood mating species. Northern blue tongue skinks. I usually cool them down to low 60s. I've had some years where they've been in the mid 50s, but then the guys down in Florida just turn off the lights and they'll be in the mid 70s to low 70s, and they still breed very well. I've been successful breeding them in Buffalo, New York, Cleveland, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, Northern Missouri, and Southern Missouri. And the one common factor with all that, regardless of what my temperatures were, was the darkness. I always had them in dark rooms.
Okay.
Up north, like I said, it was easier to cool them down. I cracked the window in my bedroom. I moved them all in there, and it was in the 50s or 60s every night. In North Carolina, I was still able to cool down a little bit, but I incorporated an air conditioner. But like I said, the Florida guys don't have that option. They could have a room to really cool them down, but a lot of them just shut the lights off. And I do find with that species is when the males start becoming active, you're going to want to get going. I might do a couple things differently this year. I'm not going to talk about them now, but I'm going to try something different with my males that aren't strong breeders, and I'm going to try something different with my males that are strong breeders. That's again, when you talk about a popularity of a species and why they're not popular, there's a lack of content out there. Blazing Skinks is doing a lot of videos right now. If you want to go look at his stuff, he's talking dietary stuff. He's really, truly devoted to what he's working with. And because of that, he's successful and he's making a lot of really great looking animals. But I don't know, man. Here's the thing. I can hype up any species, but it doesn't mean we're all going to love them. I loved Doomeril boas before they were $1,200. Now I don't want them because I don't want to spend $1,200. $300-400 maybe, $120 back in the day all day long, but now they're just not. I mean, they're out of my reach because I wouldn't just want one or two. I'd want 5 or 6, and that again is my biggest problem.
100% can understand that. All right, so if we were to take your entire collection today and we say, Dave, you're only allowed to keep one species, what species out of your collection are you keeping and why?
Well, that kind of sucks, bud.
I know. That's why I said this is going to be a hard one.
Well, okay, so here's the problem with that question. So Cheryl and I got a lot done with skinks in a short period of time. And I would generally like to believe, based on both our collections, that when I'm dead and gone, I'll be able to look back at what I did with that species and be like, fuck yeah, look at all this stuff we're leaving behind. But man, I'm a boa guy, and I'm always going to be a boa guy. So even if I'm only remembered for one animal I'm making boa constrictors, I think in the end I'm going to have to say boa constrictors. But I'll probably accomplish more in skinks than I will with boas.
I think it's hard to let go of that first love.
Yeah, it got me in the hobby, man. It was the first thing I ever bred successfully outside of crested geckos, but they bred themselves and they hatched themselves. I didn't even count that. That was like a bioactive. But no, boas, I love the body structure. I love the colors that we're working with. I love the different localities. Like, there's just so many different communities within boas based on the dwarfs, the localities, the morph guys, the guys that like to mix morphs from different localities. Like, there's so many different people in the boa community. It's a very fascinating community. But with skinks, everything's about purity. There's no fucking around in skinks. We don't get to bring new animals in the country, so we want to keep what we have pure, or at least as pure as we know they can be.
Okay. What about So one of the things that you brought up a lot with skinks was lineage, right? Like you're able to trace it all back. I think that's one of the important factors that we need to consider with
Mhm.
all species, right? ATBs have it, BOAs have it, retics have it. If you're looking at true lineage, I think that needs to be a factor to help promote the popularity of a species at this point. Like we need to look back and be able to touch, okay, well, it came out of the wild here, much like you see in like the dwarf or super dwarf community for retics or even boas at this point. Like if you don't have that paperwork showing, hey, it truly came from this island or this region, then we are not going to allow it to be called that.
So now here's one. I'll be honest. I'm actually really hated in the skink community. I've always like I'm in like no skink groups anymore. I butted heads with I guess the wrong people. But I've always kind of challenged the lineage thing in the skink community, just because there's some founding animals that have taken us in certain directions that there's almost no lineage on. Where we want to believe what we're working with are all pure. I do believe that there's been some things along the line, whether it was 20 years ago or 15 years ago, where, maybe Erie and Giants might have been mixed into Northerns at some point, and maybe a couple generations of breeding them back, you wouldn't even know the difference. I was hoping we could have some like kind of genetic testing for that, but I was told it would probably be impossible or too costly. So now it's just word of mouth and trusting the people you're getting your stuff from. I always said, like, back in the day, you go to a reptile show and you'd see skinks on table marked as skinks, and some would be island stuff and some would be northerns and so on and so forth. And we just didn't know. And there wasn't a lot of thought put into it back then, like there were with other species, because they weren't really popular. I do believe that a lot of the northern stuff that we have in the country is pure. But my argument has always been for people that say 100%, I think that's silly. To make assumptions that the 3 or 4 guys like Ray Gerge or Fenn or Turner that were doing these 20 plus years ago, when it comes to everybody else, whoever bought a skink on Fauna or wherever else, I mean, any asshole can label it. What do you call those? I always 75%. What is it? Slayer Island, or
Yeah.
what is it? The J. What's one with the J?
Jampea.
Gempea. That's such a tough thing. Like, could you imagine, like, if somebody marked it as 75% and then you got a 30-foot python? Sometimes people put things on labels to sell animals.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not challenging anybody that's doing that nowadays in any species, but the accountability, or again, the recycling of people in this hobby over the last 20, 30 years, some records are just impossible to be kept. I want to find the website if it still exists, but the Corn Snake guys had a website like this where everybody can put their data in and their parents and their babies. There was like family trees on this website, and they were super nerdy about it. I do think there's some species that really come in handy, especially like you said with the dwarf stuff, where you want to really know what you're working with. But maybe that's something that we could have in skinks in the future. But again, I still stand by what I say. I don't think we're all 100% of what we have. I think maybe some of the stuff we have here that is so different from what's in Australia might be that way for a reason. But I also do believe that people are going out of their way to try to do the right thing, as we always have and always will. But to make an assumption on some of these animals that were picked up randomly on Craigslist when the boom was happening, I just think that's silly as fuck. But again, stand behind what you have, keep working with it. But somewhere along the line with all these different species, shit, man, I might have a ball python out there with a little bit of Angolan in it. I don't know if it's true that people were putting Angolans with balls 20 years ago with mutations. We very well could have some of them. Last little tangent, but like in boa constrictors, if you're doing morph Colombians, you got to accept they're probably not pure Colombians anymore. We didn't have hypos come in from Colombia until I think like 2004 or 5. And before that, we had the orange tail hypo, the Panamanian, which was the salmon hypo by Rich Eiley, you know, none of those were pure Colombians, but they went into every Colombian mutation. And the byproduct was half a liter of hypos and half a liter of normals. So even those normals then would be hybrids in a sense. So there's really no accountability in BOAS when it comes to mutation guys, nor should there be, because, you know, we have mixed mutations from different localities, but it's been accepted. But then in the carpet python community, you do that kind of shit and you get ousted. Different communities are built different ways. I think there's denial sometimes, and sometimes there's acceptance.
100%. I like that. What's one last kind of tip or piece of advice that you would like to give anyone that has made it through this 2 hours?
You know what? I really feel like I speak to the smaller breeder, the newbie. You know, I do a lot of small shows and I spend hours with these people. I love the questions. I'm just telling everybody, and I really mean this, do not let the people burn you out. If you're in it for the animals, just love the animals. People leave this hobby because the people around them, that fucking sucks. You know, the animals brought you in, the animals should keep you here. You know, surround yourself with people you like, work with what makes you happy. Be happy with you, buddy. Like I said, I love debating people. I love controversy. I love talking about this stuff behind the scenes, but like, man, I don't know if it comes with age or what, but after a while, it's just so fucking draining that, you know, I think of the endless amount of time I spent arguing with people or doing dumb shit online or taking screenshots from conversations just so I can get back at people later. This last time I updated my phone or got a new phone, I had to delete a file and I deleted my screenshot file. It was time to let it go. You know, you get caught up in those moments in the hobby, and those moments spent doing that is moments not spent working with the animals. So enjoy the drama, enjoy it behind the scenes, you know, jump on some stuff if you want, but if that makes you happy, all the power to you. I love drama too, man. I make a lot of memes in the background. I just don't put my name on them. Like I said, you're here for the animals, be here for the animals.
100%. Dave, brother, I appreciate you. I love you very much. I can't wait to, I think I'm going to see you 2 months in a row, possibly. Are you going down to Pomona?
As of right now, 50-50 on Pomona. Arlington, yes. San Antonio on August 5th, I believe I'm going to be there. It's 50-50. Mickey has his Virginia Beach show that weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so you got Virginia Beach, and then you got San Antonio. I could drive 18 hours to Virginia Beach. Chad Halker's there. Or I could go down to San Antonio. Little less expenses on my weekend. And, you know, summer shows are tough, man. You know, people are on vacations. Once Daytona's over, then I'm a little more riskier on my shows. But until post Daytona, I don't travel nearly as far as I would.
I get that. Speaking of travel, you got to get on the road, sir. I don't want to keep you waiting. I appreciate you. Love you. We'll see you soon. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Make sure you let Dave know what you thought of his talking and my horrible questions, because apparently I'm long-winded, but it's okay. I like it, and I like to explain myself. So y'all just got to deal with it.
I thought it was solid, brother. And also, I tell everybody, and I'm really bad at it, but never be afraid to hit me up on social media. When I don't hit you back up over like 2 or 3 weeks, it's because I'm an asshole. Like I don't go on enough. I don't spend as much time on it as I should. I love having these conversations with people. Please ask me questions. Track me down at the shows. Nobody's ever bugging me.
Okay. All right, y'all. I'm gonna let Dave do his thing. You have a safe trip, brother. We'll see you very, very soon. Next week, we had one of my dear friends from California that got like a horrible connection when we did his podcast. So we're going to come back to it. Plus, he's upped his collection like incredibly. We're going to bring Josh Alvarez of South Bay Reptiles back on next week. Give him some good internet connection. Let him have some fun. I hope you guys tune in for that one. Come learn about all kinds of different species. Just have some laughs. It's going to be a good time. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. We'll see you on the next one. Badoop.